somehow. Now, it might get killed in a subcommittee of 3 people at 7 a.m. with nobody watching, but there's always some resolution. Even when a bill is not brought up for a vote, you can point to the chair and say, that's who did it.
Rough outline of what we're looking at as far as the dates. So we'll start tomorrow. Session gavels in tomorrow, and then this Saturday we'll have the gubernatorial inauguration. That's and then the crossover deadline, as Dwayne mentioned, that is going to be sorry, I'm getting notifications here. I probably should have silenced those. Crossover is going to happen on February 18th. And that means that bills that are passed in the House of Delegates will be sent over to the state Senate and vice versa. And, the bills that have died in their House of Origin will just kind of like, lay to waste. Then each chamber of origin, so like the House of Delegates does a budget, and then the Senate does a budget, and then they come together. Their deadline to complete their budgets, it's on February 26th, and then they come together to kind of like, mush their budgets together into one bill that can be passed by both chambers. So then the expected deadline for each chamber of origin to pass its own budget before those budgets get mushed together is March 14th, or sorry, that's incorrect, February 26th. March 14th is when we're anticipated to adjourn. So it's going to be like a 60-day session this year, which is different from last year. Last year was about 45 days. But since it's a budget year, we get 15 extra days of legislative fun, not madness, I'm sorry. And then the Governor-elect currently, Abigail Spanberger, her amendment to veto her deadline to veto or amend bills is April 13th. And then we'll reconvene around April 22nd. And then the deadline for the governor to sign legislation or budget and issue line item vetoes is the 25th of May. And then July 1st, 2026 is when the signed legislation and budget become effective. So thousands of bills are introduced each year. We have about 140 lawmakers, 100 in the House of Delegates, about 40 on the Senate side. And between 140 of them, I think last year they introduced over 3,000 bills or pieces of legislation. I know some of those were resolutions and some were a very small number were constitutional amendments, but between the 140 of them, they produce a lot. And sometimes it is a little difficult to follow, but we do the best we can.
Great. So, the added wrinkle, as you mentioned, is we have a new governor coming in. And while none of us we're not Cardinal Nostradamus news, and we're not here to make predictions, there's probably a bit a familiar pattern that happens in these years when there's a new governor. So what can we expect to see in the first days of a new administration, in this case, the Spanberger administration?
So Governor-elect Spanberger, once she's sworn into office, she is expected to sign a number of executive orders. I'm not sure what those executive orders will entail, but I'm interested to find out. And I've asked her administration for information on background regarding those. So hopefully I can get that. Fingers crossed. So I think those executive orders will probably set the tone or the stage for what her priorities will be during the next 4 years. And I'm interested to see what her actions on the budget will be, and her actions on bills once they're passed. Will she be aligned lockstep with General Assembly Democrats, or will we see her kind of like forge her own path through, line item vetoes in the budget or vetoing bills that were passed by the democratically controlled legislature? Yeah, it remains to be seen, but I'll stop there and let you pick it up, Dwayne.
I would just add, Governor-elect Spanberger has never served in state government. She is the first governor we've had since Claude Swanson early in the 1900s, who was gone from Congress to the governorship. Of course, we've had some who haven't served in any office. However, she has picked a very experienced cabinet with a lot of former legislators. Well, they were legislators until she picked them for cabinet members. Some former deputy secretaries who are now set to become secretary. This is sort of previews my column for tomorrow, but y'all still need to read it anyway. But I think that means she is primed for a fast start because she is surrounding herself with a lot of people who know where the levers of power are and how they operate. So while we don't necessarily have much sense of what she will do, she does seem to be positioned to do it very quickly.
Now, we don't want to make predictions, but we do know that quite a number of bills have already been filed, and we're starting to get a sense of what issues those bills are dealing with. So could you guys talk a little bit about, what the top issues are and in a little more detail, and so far as you've gotten a look at some of that proposed legislation that you think the legislature will act upon in the coming month and change?
Yeah, so we've heard a lot on the campaign trail last year about affordability and efforts to make, things like energy and home buying affordable for everyday Virginians. And lawmakers have, I'll just give you like a idea of their first handful of bills that were introduced by, House members. We've got HB1, which is an effort to increase the minimum wage incrementally to $15 per hour by January 1st, 2028. We've got HB2, which is electric utilities, energy efficiency upgrades. And then HB3, income qualified energy efficiency and weatherization task force. So that would be like an effort to figure out how to best help low-income folks weatherize their homes so that they can become like energy efficient. Their homes can become energy efficient. HB4 revolves on affordable housing, and HB5 revolves around employment and paid sick leave. And then we go into a lot of other topics and other issues, but those are the first 5 that I've seen that have been introduced on the House side. I'm going to go ahead and look for the Senate side, and I'll let Dwayne talk while I try to find that.
I'm a little more comfortable making some predictions, but they will be rooted in fact. There are multiple bills that the Democratic General Assembly has passed the past few years that Governor Youngkin, a Republican, vetoed. It'd be very easy to predict those bills will come back, they will get passed again, and now a Democratic governor will sign those into law. Beth mentioned some of those: increasing the minimum wage, paid parental leave, cannabis, legalization of retail sales of cannabis. We don't know exactly what the bill will say, but almost certainly the General Assembly will pass a legalization bill and it will get signed into law. Generally speaking, I think the things that are going to get a lot of attention will deal with energy and data centers, which overlap. Don't know exactly what all the, I can't tell you which bills are going to pass, but there will be lots of bills introduced and probably something will get passed.
And on the Senate side, I'll just give you the first 5 bills again. They're mostly companion bills to the House bills that I mentioned, with 2 differences. SB3 is an employee child care assistant pilot program. And then SB4 is school breakfasts availability at no cost to students. So again, we're seeing like efforts to support affordability initiatives and support everyday Virginians in their daily lives. So it looks like so far candidates who pounded the drum of affordability on the campaign trail, they are holding tight to their words, but we'll see what's passed and what's signed and what's vetoed and what what can actually be done.
And I may be jumping ahead here, Jeff, to another question you have, but one of the more controversial things will be what will be right to work. There are many Democrats in the General Assembly who would like to see the state repeal the right to work law. State Senator Jennifer Carroll Foy, Democrat from Prince William County, has introduced a bill to do that. Governor Spanberger has made it clear she's not particularly interested in that. So that may be a place where the interests of Democrats in the General Assembly and the interests of the Democratic governor do not align. So we'll be curious to see if that passes or if that gets, ambushed in the night in some committee and never gets to her desk.
I like the idea of it being ambushed in the night.
Well, I've always thought that the General Assembly is like, it's like a live role-playing game. Everything, it's like being it's like a murder mystery game taking place on a college campus, except everybody's used to be much older, now just somewhat older. But everything takes place within the confines of Capitol Square, and there's all this intrigue, who killed the senator's bill? I heard it was in subcommittee with a pass by indefinitely motion.
In the library with a candlestick.
Yeah, exactly.
So let's walk with this game for a moment. In looking at the bills that have been proposed so far, and in your conversations with legislators, have you been surprised by anything? Have you found like that lead pipe in the dining room and been like, what's this doing here?
Well, I have heard from some Republicans in our area, Southwest and Southside, who have expressed appreciation for the incoming Democratic governor. I've heard from Republicans who have said that, she's taken the time, or her members of her administration have taken the time to, reach out to each member to kind of like get an idea of what their legislative priorities are and how those can, fit in with what the Spanberger administration is trying to do. So I think that's an interesting piece of evidence of like coalition building, but also like reaching out to the other side of the aisle when, she doesn't really have to do that because she's got like pretty significant Democratic majorities in both chambers, right? So I hope I'm not getting ahead of myself, but it sounds like some Republican lawmakers are pleasantly surprised with her, willingness and ability to, hear from everybody regardless of their party.
But Beth is previewing her story tomorrow, and
Yeah,
I was going
exactly.
to say the same thing, that there are some, not all, but some Republican legislators who are, pretty okay so far with the Democratic governor, and they're obviously going to disagree on partisan things, but on things like economic development and transportation, there are conversations, and you may find them working together in collegial ways, what we used to call the Virginia way.
So, as we represent an area that it is largely represented in the legislature by Republicans, that could potentially be good news for getting things done for Southwest and Southside. You mentioned data centers and energy and power concerns are certainly a huge concern for our readers. Do you want to go into any detail with that, or do you want to tell the folks watching about any other things that are really concerns for Southwest Southside Virginians that maybe looking at a more practical form of state government might see some bipartisan work getting done?
I'll talk a little bit about energy and data centers. Now, our business reporter, Matt Bussey, who's not here, he is the true expert on this, but I will do my best to do an imitation there. Energy is one of the most controversial things around. Because you have, everybody agrees we need more energy. Virginia imports a whole lot of energy, much of that driven by data centers, although it was importing a lot of energy even before we had data centers. So everyone agrees we need more energy because nobody is happy with energy prices, but there's much disagreement about how to do that. Basically, do we need more? Broadly speaking, Democrats want to see more renewables, especially solar. Republicans would like to see more natural gas. Those are in conflict. Nuclear sort of fits somewhere in between. Historically, Republicans are more in favor of nuclear than Democrats, but nowadays there are more Democrats coming around to nuclear because they see that as the only way, or maybe best way to quickly meet some goals of reducing carbon emissions, because nuclear can provide a whole lot of power. It just takes a long time to build and is expensive. So Republicans would like to see the Virginia Clean Economy Act. I mean, some would like to see it repealed. That is not going to happen. But even Democrats are open to some revisions of it. We don't know exactly what kind of revisions those might be, and they, are probably not the revisions that Republicans would like. But you do have some Democrats who are admitting the act is written in, it was written in 2020, and the world is different now. The demand from data centers is, a lot higher than it was then. So that's a very, broad thing. You're going to see a push for so-called balcony solar. In fact, there's a Republican legislator introduced that to allow people to plug in their own solar units, on their balcony or porch or whatever. Something like that will probably pass. The details get complicated.
So Dwayne, balcony solar, I don't want to get too far into the weeds, but this is kind of like, this is off the grid solar, as opposed to you buying, spending tens of thousands of dollars on solar panels for your roof that's facing in just the right direction and having to be plugged into the grid with the electric company. Am I right about that?
Yeah. I mean, there are lots of ways to do it, but that's the general way. Yes.
Okay. What else besides energy do we think we might see some movement on that could benefit the Southwest or South Side economically?
I would look at the budget. And of course, we won't really see the final version of that till the legislature is done. But proposed inland port, Washington County, Governor Youngkin proposed $35 million for that. Spanberger during the campaign endorsed it multiple times. Does that mean she will endorse, $35 million in the budget? We will see. Roanoke area legislators would like to see some money for the Roanoke-Blacksburg Airport, for terminal improvements and also eventually expanding the runway. Those are two very concrete kind of things. I follow the money.
Beth, anything that you're following?
Yeah, I think what I've heard from a lot of folks is just an emphasis on economic development, and what that could look like, and whether or not that looks like, bringing businesses into Southwest Side, and what kind of, tax incentives are offered to different companies and corporations to, help Southwest and Southside's economic development. That's something that I'm interested in, is looking to see like what kind of tax incentives are offered to different companies and organizations that are looking.
Always going to be a bit of a sometimes a state local friction when it comes to economic development. And one example of that is, we go back to data centers and we see that there was some talk about, creating a state control over some zoning when it comes to kind of being able to force certain businesses to be able to develop in an area. Have you seen any legislation that that follows up on that or that prevents that on a statewide basis?
So there's about 900 bills that have been introduced so far, so I haven't made my way through all of them. But I'll keep a lookout for it.
Mm-hmm.
There was an effort in the past few sessions for the state to have well, let me back up, that those who want to see more solar energy were concerned that rural localities in particular were blocking solar because solar is not necessarily popular when it eats up lots of land. So there was an interest in some quarters could give the state more power over that. That failed last year because some Democrats who have lots of rural constituents couldn't go along with it. Spanberger has said she is much more interested in seeing what I'm going to call urban solar, using existing buildings in urban areas to put solar panels on. That would not have the concern of eating up land. I can't speak to what that does for the price, because well, price of power is of great interest.
So it's about half past, and I want to throw a couple more questions at you guys. But while I'm doing that, our audience team is going to be throwing a survey at you all to kind of identify the major issue that you're concerned with. Yeah, sorry. And so if you guys can check that out and respond. I want to talk a little bit about I don't think it's the elephant in the room exactly, but redistricting. There are a couple places where our state legislator really kind of touches concerns that are coming down on the federal side. Redistricting is one. And as somebody asked a question about in our chat, there's the question of how many of the, how are we going to deal with changes in Medicaid and stuff like that. So where federal cuts are affecting the state's ability to do things or changing the way that they have to do things. So while this survey is still up, Dwayne, can you speak a little bit to redistricting?
I can definitely speak to redistricting. The General Assembly almost certainly will pass a constitutional amendment to allow the state to set aside temporarily the bipartisan commission on redistricting. It will then go to a referendum, probably in April. Don't have a date, but sometime in the spring. If it passes, and if the courts do not intervene, then the legislature will come back and pass new maps, what some would call gerrymandered maps, that would, be in place for the November elections. There are a whole bunch of ifs there. One, do the courts intervene? Two, do voters allow it? And then what do those maps look like? There are a lot of Democrats led by Senator Louise Lucas who are pushing for a 10-to-1 map. Current congressional delegation is 6 Democrats, 5 Republicans. Those Democrats led by Lucas would like to see maps that guarantee 10 Democrats, 1 Republican. Whatever the maps are not public. We've not seen them, but there are lots of unofficial maps floating around. And really the only way to get to a 10-to-1 map is to combine Roanoke and Charlottesville, two blue islands that are currently in red seas of districts. The practical effect of that is that means Democrats in that district would need to choose between Beth Macy and Tom Perriello.
Okay. And So I think we're seeing the results coming in, and yeah, some of you have noted that your survey disappeared. Mine has kind of been bouncing around the screen a little bit, and I'm seeing the results as they're coming in. And right now, energy and data centers is leading the pack here. So I'm going to look quickly over the questions that were sent to us previously about energy and data centers. And one of the questions was about the selection of an energy czar by Spanberger and state solar and battery storage incentives to make up for the loss of federal tax incentives. Do we know what's happening with the battery storage center? Is there some legislation happening about that?
There will be lots of legislation about that. But we I don't have particular details to share. Spanberger has talked about appointing an energy czar, but we've not heard word on that. She did appoint a cannabis czar.
Okay.
Now that is my phrase, not hers. Her phrase is senior advisor. But State Senator Adam Eben, Democrat from Alexandria, who has been active in the cannabis legislation, he will be leaving the Senate to become senior advisor / cannabis czar. I see nobody picked cannabis as their top choice.
Nobody.
But I don't know whether that means, I don't know what that means, but you're going to get it anyway. But in terms of the energy czar, she said she could appoint one. We haven't heard yet.
Okay. I think this is as good a time as any to talk about the way that we cover the news. And we had a couple questions around non-biased coverage, that people would like to see non-biased coverage about the General Assembly session. Can we guarantee that will happen? We can guarantee that we're a independent, nonprofit, nonpartisan newsroom. And I'll turn it over to Beth to talk a little bit about what her coverage consists of, the nuts and bolts of it. But I do want to first give you guys the mantra that I preach to my reporters every day, and that is that part of being nonpartisan means, and part of really being, even though we cover a wide region, being local journalists, is that our stories have to have three elements to them, and these can be read as a phrase or as three separate words shouted out loud, and that's local human impact. So we don't deal in theoreticals, we don't deal in opinions of what might happen or what could be the worst case scenario. We follow the facts. We look for impact that is both local and where we can find human beings who are being impacted by a decision in government, or who are impacting their communities by decisions that they make and actions that they take. So, Beth, you've done work outside of Cardinal for Gannett, and you've been with Cardinal for a year and a couple months. And how do you position yourself as a reporter when you're covering the General Assembly? There are so many facts flying around, and there's so many people throwing spin at us every single day. Give us a sense of how you keep your balance there.
Yeah, I think a way that I keep my balance is to, center my focus on Southwest and Southside Virginia. Who are the people that live there? What are the, unique needs of the two regions? And how are those unique needs being represented by their lawmakers? We do have a lot of Republicans from our area. We've got a couple of Democrats too. And I try to talk with, the Democrats as much as I talk with the Republicans. I think one of my main ways of maintaining, I guess a lack of bias is to, not pay attention to the letter behind the person's name. but to take a look at the bills that they are, introducing, putting forth, and what, explore what the effects of of that legislation could be on folks who live and work in Southwest and Southside. This isn't a story that came out of the 2025 General Assembly session, but one story, for example, was that I worked on in June was a story about how the FEMA funding formula kind of like worked against lower income folks in Southwest and Southside Virginia in their efforts to recover from the February floods. And, when I was down in Richlands, I wasn't asking people like whether or not they're like a Republican or a Democrat, or like who did they vote for in the 2024 election. I was asking them, how has the lack of help from FEMA, or the lack of the lack of individual assistance from FEMA, how has that affected you and your well-being, and how has that affected your ability to recover from this natural disaster? At the end of the day, we're all just human beings, right? Forget about the D, forget about the R. Like, how are policies and how's legislation going to affect, the everyday person, right? And we can't lose sight of that. I don't know if that answers the question, but
Yes. Thanks, Beth. Dwayne, anything to add?
No, I thought Beth did a good job there.
hey, thanks.
Yeah. Okay.
I know we got other questions piling up, so.
All right. I'm going to try and remove this so I can see some of the questions as they're coming in. One question regards what legislation regarding flock cameras do you think might be forthcoming? I don't know that I've seen anything, but have you guys seen anything regarding public surveillance in the incoming bills?
I have not, but like Beth, I have not gotten through all 900 bills either.
Yeah, I can do a quick search on the Legislative Information System for flock or ALPRs, and I'm not seeing anything. I'm not seeing anything for that. I can do like a quick search for surveillance. Probably spelled that wrong.
Next one of those interesting issues that does not split left and right. There are some on each wing in each camp.
Yes.
Those are always the most interesting issues.
I do know it continues to rumble up locally since we first reported it almost a year ago. Most recently, the city of Stanton, a little north of us, decided to just can its entire program and shut down its LPR surveillance systems. So you're seeing some of that kind of thing happen where, as a result of people becoming informed about what's happening, localities are just taking it into their own hands to do things that are more definitive than the type of things we might see coming from legislation. The legislation that was enacted last year certainly put a dent into the worst potential nightmares of this surveillance. But there are ongoing lawsuits east of us that are likely to affect us. State level AI regulation. We did see a bill that we were talking about this morning that had to do with that, right?
Yeah, quick search.
Go ahead.
You can talk. I'm just searching.
Oh, yeah. Tad Dickens, our technology writer, is looking into that. I don't have the details on that. I'll jump back up to the question before that from Liz that I'm eager to
Go ahead.
address. Liz asked, in general, how well do you think the members of the General Assembly who represent Southside and Southwest work together in terms of legislative strategy on priority topics? In terms of the legislators from Southwest Virginia, they are generally a very united group. I'm obviously more familiar with them than I am other parts of the state, but they tend to be very united. And while they are all Republicans and I'm talking like west of the New River Valley now. While they're all Republicans and therefore conservative, they're also very practical people who are, willing to deal. So I think, you're seeing some of them, in conversation with the Spanberger administration on things like economic development and transportation. The legislators from Southside, I won't say they're disunited, but they're, they are hard pressed to, be as united as those legislators from Southwest Virginia. Like some would call far Southwest Virginia. Although if you're from there, it's not far, it's just where you are. And I will add, those legislators also have I think, a different view of legislating than other legislators around the state by necessity. Some legislators see themselves as people who, go to Richmond and vote on bills and, that's it. Many of the legislators from Southwest Virginia and increasingly from Southside, I'm thinking of Delegate Eric Phillips from Henry County in particular, see themselves as sort of mini economic development directors. And they are very involved in anything dealing with economic development. If you're a legislator from a more affluent area, you don't have to worry about those things. But if you're a legislator from that part of the state, that's front and center more than a lot of ideological or partisan concerns.
Great.
Going back to the question about like AI legislation, it looks like we've got quite a few bills. But I'll just name a few. We've got HB 635, which is an Artificial Intelligence Chatbots Act. It's going to list prohibited practices and penalties. HB 638, which is a regulation of data brokers. That sounds interesting. I don't know what a data broker is, but I'm going to find out. Yeah, a lot of different. Okay, here we go. HB 758, Artificial Intelligence Chatbots and Minors Act. HB 797, Virginia Information Technologies Agency, Artificial Intelligence Independent Verification Organizations, and the list goes on. So our lawmakers are thinking about it and they are working on it.
I think there was one we saw this morning, which was about the impact of AI on state employees, that was laying out some pathways if somebody's job was impacted by artificial intelligence, that it would kind of shunt them to the front of the line for training, for other open roles within the state government, and things like that. So trying to get a little bit ahead of that, maybe foreseeing some kind of impacts on state employees, and trying to get ahead of that wave with some programs and plans that would help someone whose job is displaced by AI as well.
That could be like HB 310, Artificial Intelligence Workforce Impact Act.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't read into it in detail, but a lot of these bills were actually, I don't think they were here this morning. I think they all kind of dumped today.
Yeah.
So.
And that's another thing to keep in mind is, we can look at what we have as of the moment and glean some kind of behavioral trends. But the deadline is not yet on the horizon for we'll continue to see bills being proposed and then reshaped by amendments and things, which can in some cases radically alter the intent of the bill.
I like the way you put that, Jeff. Reshaped. Some might call it butchered. Depending on your point of view. Liz, thanks for that report. I love a good report. So.
Christy asked, curious how you all think they'll allocate the budget in terms of balancing the enormous needs of education versus replacing cut Medicaid funds. What do we know about that so far?
I'll let you take it. I'll let you take it.
Oh, okay. I don't think we know much, except there's a not surprisingly. Yeah, there are different views between Democrats and Republicans on the budget. Republicans think there's plenty of money there. Democrats don't. And yeah, no one is talking in terms of a tax increase. But yeah, Democrats feel a lot more pressed fiscally than Republicans do. Yeah, how those get balanced out in the end, yeah, I couldn't tell you.
I'm thinking about redistricting. Are there any other things up on the constitutional amendment front that we should be aware of?
There will be 3 other constitutional amendments that will pass and go to voters. Just to remind you about how constitutional amendments in Virginia work. They have to pass the General Assembly twice with an election in between. So all these amendments passed the General Assembly last year. We had an election in November. Now they need to pass again and go to a referendum. The other 3 that are, we're moving along, I will say, normally until redistricting came along. And I'll just give the shorthand on here. One deals with abortion, guaranteeing a right to an abortion. The other deals with guaranteeing a right to same-sex marriage. The purpose of that is just in case the U.S. Supreme Court ever changes its mind on same-sex marriage. Virginia's Constitution includes a clause from an amendment we passed, a decade or so back, forbidding same-sex marriage. If the U.S. Supreme Court ever changed its mind on that subject, that provision would come back into force. So this proposed constitutional amendment would remove that from the state constitution and instead insert a right to same-sex marriage. And then the third one is restoring civil rights to convicted felons. Virginia is the rare state that does not have some automatic procedure for that. You have to go to the governor to get your rights restored. This would set up a procedure on that. All 3 of those passed, last year. They will certainly all pass again with, Democrat majorities in the General Assembly. The question is when we will get to vote on them. Under normal circumstances, that would be November, but there's some chatter of taking one or more of these and putting them on the ballot in a special election at the same time as the redistricting referendum to juice up the turnout on that.
Okay, we have a question about civic engagement, which is more of a, this is less about the General Assembly and more about, our ability to make our concerns in the concerns of folks who live in Southwest and Southside heard in the alleged halls of power in Richmond. So the question was, what can we do in Southwest Virginia to be heard? Now, as an editor, I would say, that this is part of our mission. This is hard coded into what we try to do. And Beth's story that she was talking about earlier, and a story that Susan Cameron, our Southwest reporter, wrote last year, just about the very local on the ground impacts of federal budget cuts, and as Beth was saying, of like the FEMA calculus. We were able to really push that information out there for what it looks like on the ground when a decision is made far away, from Southwestern Virginia. But as reporter and editor Beth and Dwayne, I'm curious, because you've run into people who are more active in wanting to have their voices heard, and then people that we literally have to seek out and convince to speak to us so that we can amplify a voice, from our readership area. Do you have any advice, or do you have any kind of personal answer to that question? How can we be heard?
I do. Some folks will not like it, and I will preface this by saying that I'm not very philosophical. I tend to be very practical. So this will seem cynical. Um, Either Southwest Virginia needs to elect more Democrats or the other parts of the state need to elect more Republicans. Southwest and Southside mostly send Republicans to Richmond. They are in the minority. And so on anything that is partisan or ideological, voices on this side of the state don't really matter that much. That said, most bills in the General Assembly are not partisan or ideological. They break down lots of other ways. I mean, we were talking earlier about surveillance that doesn't even break down cleanly left and right. For that, contacting legislators, being parts of groups that lobby. Beth is there. She can speak more to that end. I'm more the numbers guy looking at, this is a minority part of the state. And if you're in the minority, you're in the minority.
And my response is going to be completely self-serving in that I want to hear your stories and I want you to talk to me and I want to help amplify those issues that, folks are experiencing in Southwest and Southside Virginia. So talk to me. I love talking to people sometimes.
Excellent. I feel like that, yeah, that question was almost a well-seeded promotional piece for Cardinal News. But there's also, there's a horde of people from our region heading to Richmond for the inauguration of the first female governor in Virginia. And, people can get their voices heard by showing up in one way or the other. It doesn't mean becoming a political activist. In some cases, it's less political than that, but showing up and, I guess constitutional amendments are also there. They generally start on a citizen level, by people who want to see a change that's more permanent, to the culture of their state. So I think we're exactly at 6:55 where I need to start wrapping up. And so I want to make sure that I know there are a lot of unanswered questions and some of these questions we just can't answer because we have to see what happens over the next 2 months. But a way to stay in touch with us is to sign up for our newsletters, our daily newsletter, and then our West of the Capitol newsletter, which is Dwayne's award-winning weekly newsletter of politics and policy and opinion. It's very easy to reach us. If you know our first name and you know how it's spelled, then you can write us an email. I did tangle with the Jeff versus Jeffrey for my first 6 months here, but I got to cut down to Jeff. And Dwayne and Elizabeth's email addresses are right there. And continue to check us out and be in touch with us for anything that you want us to write about, or as Beth says, be in touch with her if you want your story told. We were talking, we have regular meetings where we talk about the craft of reporting and the craft of writing. And there was a podcaster that we listened to, a bit she did about a Little League baseball game in Vermont. And she said, she was asked about this podcast, which is great. She didn't talk to the coach. She didn't talk to parents. She talked to 8, 9, and 10-year-old kids during the game. And they were extremely knowledgeable. And they were, and they really embodied the drama of being a 9-year-old in like a regional playoff game for Little League better than any adult could have. And the reporter said something to the effect of, everybody is an expert on their own lives. And you guys are all experts on your own lives and on the lives of your communities. And we can do nothing without hearing from the experts, in these communities. And that's you all. So stay in touch, please. And I think there will be a feedback survey that that will be sent to you, or that we'll see a sign. Can you go back once, Laura, so we can look at what I missed? Yes, there are some links here to the actual bill tracker. So if you're curious to know more than the three of us could tell you about what bills are currently up there, you can go to lis.virginia.gov and read all about the bills. You can find your legislators and write to them directly. And vpap.org has tons of great information. If you're interested in politics, you're interested in policy, you're interested in legislation, VPAP is a great source, and it's a source for us. It's a great source for citizens. And then there are also these ways to submit public comment on bills by committee, and that's hodspeak.house.virginia.gov/committees. And then we will, on this next page, have a brief survey. I hope you all fill out. It's been great being part of this event. I always love to hear Dwayne and Beth talk, and I'm glad they had a chance to speak to you all. Laura, Zach, thanks for dropping those URLs into the chat. So if you didn't catch them yet, they're in the chat.
And if I can just shoehorn in just one last time.
Yes, sir.
The legislature today is much more accessible than it used to be. Thanks to those links that you're, posting there. If you go back to the, well, as far as the pre-internet era, which a few of us remember, the only way to find out a bill was to go, to the state capitol. Now you can, sit at home and, watch every session, every committee meeting live streamed, and, there are ways to, sign up for online public comment. That doesn't necessarily mean you will get listened to. I still remain, cynical about that, or I think practical, but, it is not as inaccessible as it used to be.
All right. Well, thanks so much for joining us, and stay in touch.